Hello, I'm Nancy Gershi, and this is the OWASP DevSecOps Show. On today's show, Erica Anderson, Chief Operating Officer and huge security nerd at SafeStack, will explore 3 common mistakes teams make when embracing application security at speed and how you can avoid making them. But first, a short message from today's sponsor, Bridge Crew. Security is a software problem that isn't being solved like one. That's why we started Bridge Crew. Our platform connects with your cloud infrastructure to quickly identify security issues. With continuous automation, you can always trust that you are in line with cloud security best practices. Start automating your cloud security with Bridge Crew for free. Hello again, Nancy here from OWASP DevSecOps Show, where we meet practitioners from the industry who join us to teach us something new. And if you are new here, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and enable your notifications. Note that all the important information that we'll discuss today will be added to the description box below. And let's jump right into it. Our guest today is Erica Anderson. Erica is the Chief Operating Officer and a huge security nerd at SafeStack, a security consultancy in New Zealand that specializes in working with smaller and faster moving companies. She has worked with a wide range of organizations, from small New Zealand businesses to global corporations. She knows what it feels like to try and move fast while staying secure. But again, before we meet Erica, let me first introduce you to my co-host for today, Nicole Becker, and our special guest host, Shira. Here we go. Hi, Shira. Hi, Nicole.
Hey.
Nicole's on camera today, but she might be a bit later.
Yeah, I'm just having some bandwidth issues. I will.
You'll join us just a bit later.
Yes.
Awesome. So, Nicole, tell our audience a little bit about you.
Well, I guess I'm an old regular here on the DevSecOps show, but Nicole Becker. I have been in this application security and security space for a pretty long time. Pretty active in all things OWASP. I'm just excited to talk about all this new stuff.
Excellent. And today we're lucky to have the visit of Shira. Shira, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you as well. I know we're talking about application security, about DevOps, about cloud. So I said, sure would be a good fit for the show today. And when I asked you to come, you were happy. And thank you for being here. So tell us a little bit about you.
So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm super honored to be on the DevSecOps show. And I've been in the security industry for many years, but in the last year, I started my own cloud security company called Solvo. We automate cloud security and we shift left towards developers because this is, a pain that all of us feel every day. So we wanted to help them solve their problems as fast and as early as possible. And other than that, I'm the co-chair of OWASP Israel. And if any of our audience wants to join us this week for OWASP Israel conference, please feel free to do so. We have many interesting talks for you.
That's fantastic. So let's jump right into it and meet Erica. Hi, Erica.
Hello.
How are you today?
Hi.
Excellent.
How's it going?
Super. Have you been early for you, right? We're like all over the world today. I'm in Ottawa, Canada. You're in Tel Aviv, and you're in New Zealand, correct? And Nicole and Nicole are in the same time zone from New York. Anyway, so what do you have planned for us today?
Today I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the biases that you tend to face when it comes to trying to embed application security throughout, your DevOps, your DevSecOps, your whatever you want to call your way of moving fast, and just some of the things that we've that I've kind of come across, as well as Laura Bell, who I work really closely with at SafeStack. And it's kind of having a bit of a chat about it. So, and I think it's the 3 biases that I'll talk about. I think everyone has their own perspectives, their own experiences. So I'm looking forward to having a bit of a corridor or a bit of a chat around each of these and kind of see where you all might have kind of experienced some of these things.
Fantastic.
So yeah, that's me.
Let's get it going. I think you have slides that you shared with us. Let me bring them on.
I do. Yes.
Here they
cool.
are.
Brilliant. So we're going to be doing some bias hunting rather than some bug hunting for once. And the three biases that I wanted to talk us through are, the first one is seniority bias. So, we can only go faster if we use experienced engineers. Tools bias, which is, we can only go faster if we use this particular tool or this particular technology. And then the recency bias of, we can only go faster if we do this thing that I just read about or that I heard on this podcast last week or that I read in this blog or this research paper. And these are some of the biases that we'll kind of chat through. What I was mentioning at the start, everyone has their own way of referring to how fast they move, right? It's, you might do Agile, you might do Scrum, you might do Kanban, you might call it DevOps, you might call it DevSecOps. Whatever the case is, those titles, it just shows the intention of what you're trying to do rather than like how to do it, right? Like there's no right or wrong way how to do DevSecOps. It 100% always depends on the team that you have, what you're actually building, the other types of work that you might be competing against. So all of the bias that I'm going to kind of talk through today is going to be based off of what you're doing rather than which methodology or which framework you kind of follow. Cool. So we'll get into the very first one, which is seniority bias. And, as someone who's been doing security for a couple of years now, I'm fortunately in the position where, I get to teach people about things, right? I've got new people on teams that I've worked with in the past where, they haven't heard of particular types of vulnerabilities. And, at SafeStack, we specialize in teaching developers about security vulnerabilities. So, teaching them for the first time how to actually find a cross-site scripting vulnerability, or for the first time of how OS injection actually kind of works. So, the first bias that I wanted to kind of talk through is around the bias of thinking that you need to have senior engineers in order to embed application security throughout your pipeline. And I thought what would be good for some of the people who are listening along at home is to just kind of do a bit of self-inspection, I think is retrospective. Tune into yourself and think about if some of these symptoms that we'll be talking about are things that you might have at your teams, things that where you work, and just try to see if there's maybe other ways to kind of handle those biases. So for seniority bias, it starts with some of the symptoms that you'll have would be only advertising for senior positions and only recruiting for senior positions. You must have X amount of years experience with this particular language in order to be a security engineer or just be an engineer on our team, when maybe the language itself had only been around for that number of years. I've seen my fair share of recruiting post hiccups when it's, you must have more experience in this language than has ever existed before kind of thing.
Erica, can I be the devil advocate for a minute? Because, I look at it, working at a young startup where, every team member is so crucial. Sometimes we really have to take into the team that person who is very, very senior, because we need to deliver software. We need to deliver a product. And at the end of the day, very often R&D teams are measured on how fast they deliver the feature. Not how secured the feature is. So what do you recommend to do when everything is very time critical?
Yes. Sorry, I think my internet might have just flipped, but I think I got your whole question, Shira.
Okay.
But so what would you do in that case? And I think it really kind of the typical cop-out, right? It depends. But I think it comes down to a few things. So I think there are, it's basically, hi.
I've been losing your audio quite a bit. What about you, Shira? Could you hear it?
Huh.
Yeah,
You
same
too?
here.
Okay.
Same here.
What about, can you hear me now?
Same here. So now you're good. So maybe you want to start over just to make sure we don't miss anything.
That's okay. So, hello. Am I all good now?
Yes.
Yep.
You're good. Yeah, it's shaky, but let's try it.
It's always like that in
It's
the money
shifting.
time, right?
Oh, that's so weird.
It went well before, and now in production, it's not working.
I know. We're like, it's like we're having a chat 30 minutes before, and everything is roses, and then of course, yeah, you're on stage, and it's terrible. So what I was saying, Shira, is that when it comes to those kind of things, it really much depends, because it's kind of one of those things, right? Where yeah, you might be trying to rush to get a particular feature out because it's going to deliver business value, and you need to get that one feature out. But it's never just that one feature. It's okay. Well, you made it past that deadline now. Now it's the next feature, and then it's the next one, and it's kind of the concept of you kind of have to reflect on whether or not you're trying to run in a sprint or you're trying to run in a marathon. So and it comes down to, for the teams. So I've just rolled off a client where I actually started helping them embed their security team into how their whole organization did agile, which was the mission. But one of the things that was really great is that we kind of set our expectations at a level that we knew that we could achieve if we didn't have that that 10 times engineer or that rock star or that particular person carrying us the whole way. So we kind of, in a sense, we kind of set our expectations a bar below that, so that we're not always placing a reliance on that one person or relying on just those seniors to do that work, because it's kind of ultimately, yeah, you might be up against a clock to get that feature out, but then it's going to happen again in a very same position where you're going to have to push something out for a particular time. So it's better instead to kind of take some of the, we'll get to it in just a second, but take some of the things such as, having that senior sit down with one of your newer staff and having that other person watch and take notes and maybe doing the documentation for a particular new thing, or taking off small bits of that project and being able to farm them out to that the people on the team that are perhaps a bit newer, or even if it's the case of if you're up against the clock and incident response, maybe. I don't know why my internet is doing this to me now. I'm sorry, people.
No worries. We just had also a question from the chat of maybe specifying what you meant by a senior. What do you understand as senior? Maybe we can define that before moving forward.
Oh, what do I understand as a senior? Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So for what I'm referring to here, what is a senior? So a senior here is just what your organization might call a senior, really, which unfortunately really kind of varies by your organization. So, for example, if you're on a team and, you're looking to add more people to your team, but the very first thing you try to do is, oh, I need a senior. They need to have X number of years experience. They will need to deploying in our particular environment for X number of years. They need to know the X of these vulnerability tools or these dependency checkers or these libraries. So it's kind of like, I guess from a senior point of view, it depends on how your organization is going to actually out to market and hire for those people. But it typically kind of comes along with having, over 5 years experience as part of, the technology stack that you're working in, the libraries that you're working in, or the actual tool sets that you're trying to embed in your pipeline. So yeah, hopefully my full answer came through on that one.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yes. Okay. So yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Sweet.
Maybe we could try without a video for a while.
Did that answer your question? Sure.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll have plenty more questions as you move forward.
Yeah. Erica, do you want to try stopping your video for a while and maybe see if just the audio will work and we can put your slides as a filler?
Yeah.
How does that work? Let's try that.
Perfect.
Okay.
Sweet. Okay.
Okay.
Awesome. Sweet. Let me, actually, would you mind if I just quickly left the studio and just came back?
No, absolutely. Take a minute.
Okay, cool. 1 second.
In the meantime, I can say that I really like what Erica said before about giving small tasks to other team members who need some more experience. For example, watching a senior doing something and have the junior developer do some documentation around it. I think that most of us don't like to document, but it's probably a good way to learn something new. So, I mean, I think that very often we think that the dev team should develop and the security team should do security. We talk a lot about, teaching the developers security, but at the end of the day, we're not succeeding in this task. We are failing it over and over again. So we should do something differently.
Let's see what she has to say. Erica's back. Are you hearing us, Erica?
Hi.
Hey.
Yes, I am.
Okay, awesome.
Hey.
So did you catch what Shira was saying?
No, I logged in just as you were finishing, Shira.
Okay.
Good. So how about if you take it from where we stopped and...
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, good. So we're talking a bit about seniority bias, only advertising for seniors, thinking that the seniors are going to be the ones to kind of solve the problems and the reasons why you're not moving as fast as you want to move. And then the second one, in terms of, if your team is actually experiencing seniority bias, is just having one person doing your peer review for all of your pull requests or all of your code changes, or, for example, maybe only having one person actually developing the code for security specific components of your code. So whether or not that's around authentication or data storage or anything along those lines, is just having that one person kind of do those tasks. And when you start developing is actually a pretty big risk that I see in a lot of organizations, especially smaller ones, is starting to develop that concept of key person risk. In Wellington, we call it the bus theory. Of, it's one of those things that if that person got hit by a bus, knock on wood, of course, could the organization continue to kind of operate afterwards, or would they be at risk of not being able to do certain things because they were dependent on that one person? And then another symptom of seniority bias in your team would be, using terms like, oh, well, obviously, or, obviously this is how we would be susceptible to things like cross-site searching, or obviously that's an OS injection attack. And using that type of terminology and assuming that things are common sense or, universally known approaches, when honestly, some of these approaches might have only been around for a couple years, is another symptom that you're dealing with seniority bias. And for me personally, the first language that I learned was C++ in Java, so many moons ago. And like the security that you have for those languages is completely different from other languages that we actually now build our stacks on. And I'm not sure, Nancy and Shira, what languages you both kind of you first were introduced to?
C++ as well, a while back, showing my age.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But yeah, so it's one of those things where, everyone has a completely different path of what got them to where they are now, working for your organization. So, instead of, not everyone is going to know exactly every single attack, or not everyone will have experienced certain. So, relying and assuming that everyone has the same level of understanding about things is, not a good thing. And I think, Nicole, this might be a really good chance now. Like we were talking a bit before the show about, some other perspectives and some other opinions on seniority bias. Did you want to play that audio?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let me share my screen. Make sure that I share my audio. Oh, where's that? Here we go. It was on the Secure Developer Podcast, episode 26, Security Education with Jim Manico. Let me play a few seconds of that.
Development team, full-time job, is it a competency? What do you see there that you think is like a good model for success?
I'm going to answer this a little awkwardly, but we had a lot of security problems. And one of the dev teams I was working with, we solved the problem by removing 2 developers, not by adding anything, but by taking the 2 beginners who were writing like a huge amount of vulns every day and got them into a different project. That solved our problem. That got us to a better risk play statistically. And the point is, I want senior developers on my team. If I have a security critical product, the first thing I'm going to do is get beginners out of the way. This is a horrible thing to say. Nobody wants to hear this, but you need a developer, in my opinion, who's been writing code for 3 to 5 years before we can even start talking application security in most of the teams that I work with. So step 1, having a senior team that already understands the rigors of process, and they're actually engineers and not just code hackers. Once I have a team of engineers, I can institute all the above: process, requirements, infrastructure for testing, all the pieces we need for good application security. And training becomes easier. Training doesn't have to become this difficult thing. These developers.
Nancy, are you muted?
Your audio is off.
Oh, yes. Okay, so I think we get the picture with what I just shared. There's a few more minutes of ranting and saying how, when you're new, you're not useful, you should get out of the way and leave senior people in there to do the job. So I guess that goes really against what not against, but it's a different opinion.
Jim was talking about, I think he was talking about a specific problem that they had to solve. And in order to move faster, they removed 2 junior developers from the team so that they will not, slow them down. I'm not saying that it's never a good solution. If you have a critical problem and you don't have time, this is, it's an incident response, whatever. I can understand that approach. I don't always support it. I actually think that, going back to what Erica said before, I think that when it's not time critical, if you can hook up a senior developer with a junior developer and let them work together and let one learn from the other, this is going to be the best. Because, waiting for someone to have 3 to 5 years of seniority as a software developer and then starting to teach them about security culture, it's too late.
And how do you teach them outside of the team?
Exactly. And also, someone being a developer for 3 to 5 years does not mean they're a good developer. They just mean they've been writing or copy-pasting code for 3 to 5 years. That's it.
Yeah.
Anything you have to add to that, Nicole? I feel like you might have some experience to share.
No, I think that's just kind of the nature of technology. In a way, right? Broad strokes across the entire industry. So like security people are guilty of that too, right? There's been plenty of times where I've, been that person. But yeah, I agree with you, right? Like it's hard to measure depth of experience when we sort of practice a lot of just-in-time learning.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of technology. Like today's issue or today's security issue was not yesterday. So I got to learn today's right now. And then tomorrow's is going to be a whole different thing. And a whole new cloud service. So there's a lot of that reactive kind of stuff. And you're right, you can't teach that, but you can formalize principles, I think, in teams. And I think, or at least formalize things like don't make the dumb decision, right? Like that kind of stuff. But,
Yeah. And I just saw Adrian's question pop up there just a minute ago around, what was that again, Nancy? Could you read it back?
Well, it was his comment about, in my experience, pairing is the best to build the confidence of team members that lack experience.
And that's exactly it, right? Like that was actually going to be one of my comments in terms of how to improve seniority bias. But just really quickly, just to kind of like close out the loop on Jim Manico's comments, definitely it's one of those things that you can't just like Nicole said, you can't just do broad brushstrokes. You can't always push the junior developers to the side. You can't always just because you need to get something out every single time doesn't mean that you should always push people away. So it's kind of one of those things you really kind of balance it out. Something, in my experience, something that's been really beneficial is, for example, I've supported a client through a pretty intense security incident as part of, basically one of the applications that they provide to a large number of people was currently under attack by denial of service. So I supported the team, but I was the one who actually led the incident response. And it wasn't, it was because it was time critical, right? A denial of service attack means that you need to react right away. You don't have time to actually teach the other people, what this actually means, what the logs mean. But what we ended up doing after the fact is, we did kind of a pseudo tabletop. I printed out all of the tickets, all of the emails, and we sat around a round table, and I kind of passed it out to people, and we kind of simulated of, here is the first message that we got around this, and then here was the next thing. What would you do in this situation? Because not saying that what I did was perfect, but if we were to look back on this and we had the spare time that we do now, how would we have done things differently? And it allows the team to kind of know, that's where Erica thought to then go do this. Or, that makes sense because of X, Y, Z. And you have a bit more time to talk through it so that when it happens again, you can be like, hey, go check this such and such. And at least people have that reference point without having that high stress situation. So,
Totally.
Yeah. But just to kind of round out the seniority bias section is, some of the impacts of, by always relying on that key person or always kind of referring out and making that one, making your one security champion always the person who reviews code, or just relying on those key people is all the stuff that we were kind of already addressing on already. Burnout, the one sprint, if it's one urgent sprint after another urgent sprint and it's just repeating because you're in this for the long haul and you're in this for a marathon, it just completely kills that person. And if they then decide to leave because it's always greener on the other side, they can go somewhere else. It's going to have a huge detrimental impact to your organization, because guarantee that a lot of the things that they do for your team are probably not as well documented. You don't tend to always have the spare time. I still have a list on a sheet of paper of things that I need to document in our knowledge base to teach our teams things that Erica does within SafeStack. And it's just one of those things that it's a never-ending game of playing catch-up. So, if those people leave because they're burned out, because they're tired, it's going to have a huge impact, and it's going to put yourself in a worse off position because the knowledge wouldn't have been shared. But then another thing as well is that, for me personally, I don't have time to listen to the podcasts all the time or read the research articles. And, by only relying on me to do those things because I'm a senior, it kind of makes everything stagnate a bit. Right? Your newer people are going to be the ones that are going to the conference talks. They're trying to absorb as much knowledge as possible. So they're not going to really be in a position to be able to float new ideas or different ways of doing things because the senior always does it a particular way. And because because that is their method and they don't want to have it changed. So unfortunately, it just leads to that whole concept of it keeps the knowledge within one person's mind. And it really kind of stops the team from really experimenting with different new, fresh ideas. But to the point of the person on the YouTube chat, some of the ways that I personally overcome seniority bias is sharing the load, and even if that means sacrificing some of your speed, right? So Shira, you were talking a bit about if you're trying to get one particular thing out the door, sometimes it might be better just to have that senior person help out, but when it comes to setting your expectations sprint after sprint of, hey, we're going to accomplish, 10 bugs this iteration, and we want to, really fix this key security vulnerability feature, setting that bar to make sure that you're not setting that bar with the intent that one senior person is going to be the one smashing through all of those things. Set it a little bit lower so you actually have that breathing room and that spare time to actually breathe and fix those things. But also, hiring broadly. I work with a team right now, and our experience is completely different. And then that's the great thing about having a diverse team from different backgrounds and not just kind of expecting everyone to be a senior and everyone to know all about the ins and outs of the OWASP top 10 or different things. But, everyone has their own languages. Like all of us here, I know some of us have kind of started our programming language a bit on the earlier path of C++ and stuff. But, I work with teams who the first and only language they really know is Python. And it doesn't make them any less of a valuable player on our team. If anything, they teach me a thing or two because I learned programming languages eons ago. And I don't think even OWASP top 10 was a thing when I was learning my programming language. So it's like we all have experienced different things. So hiring broadly and based off of various different experiences rather than the one particular shoehorned person that you're looking for. And then the last thing, is pairing on work. One of the really valuable things that I find is even doing a screen share. And I'll be sitting at home just like tinkering through stuff, and I'll have one of my newer engineers just watching. And you have to have a bit of patience because they'll interrupt me and be like, oh, well, why did you do this instead of this? And I'll explain it and we'll go through. But what's been really helpful is that when we pair these tasks, and I work for a fully remote team, so it's screen share for us, or if it's sitting next to each other. But the really helpful thing is that they kind of challenge the way I do things. They're like, oh, well, why don't you do it this way? And it's, by asking those questions and by interrupting me and, while I'm still doing the work and they're still trying to learn and understand, but they're able to challenge me to see if there is a better and smarter way of doing things. So definitely pairing up on even the smaller tasks of operational things, of patching, of, going through input, fixing bugs. I think definitely sharing that stuff, sharing that load really helps share the knowledge. So, that's seniority bias. Is there anything else that you all wanted to chat about on that one?
I really like that third comment or tip. I think that mentorship and having a buddy really helps.
For sure, yeah.
But it's also, for us as the leaders of the organizations, it's also up to us to deliver the message that it's important for us. It's a priority for us to have mentorship in our organization. We expect the seniors to do this as a part of their job.
Yeah. And I think that's actually what makes a good senior as well, is it's not the technical ability. It's not the ability to, solve things in a particular way. It's actually the ability to communicate what you technically know in your head to someone who doesn't speak that same language, or someone who perhaps doesn't have that years of experience. It's being able to mentor others and coach others, I think, is a better sign of being a senior rather than, 3 to 5 years experience doing X, Y, Z. Because it's hard. It is really hard to coach people. And it's one of like the underappreciated skills of most of like our team leads or our senior staff. Brilliant. Excellent. I think my internet is better now. So yeah.
It definitely
Mine is
feels more stable.
I don't know either. I'll chalk it up to New Zealand. So the next bias that I wanted to chat through is tools bias. And this is from the concept of, we can only go faster if we buy this tool or this technology or use this system. And, this is a really common thing, if it's, for example, if, your organization doesn't do anything around vulnerability scanning, and you're like, we have to use Tenable, and we have to put all of these agents within our network, and then we need to stop all of our build pipelines before we actually deploy it in secure code, and we need to do all of these things, and this tool is gonna, save our organization or truly make a difference on our organization. And it's not that it isn't true. It's just there are definitely right and wrong ways to go about actually deploying these tools and using them, because it kind of, something, I think the theme of this whole talk is really coming back to the whole people aspect of DevSecOps, of, making sure that people have the skills and the support and they can ask questions and they know how to do things, and you're sharing the knowledge. And the same thing comes down to the tool bias. So, within your own organization, you can tell if you have a tool bias, if you're spending thousands of dollars on tools and systems to integrate into your lifecycle, but, raise your hand at home if you've had to rip out those tools shortly after because you didn't know how to actually manage the output, or you didn't know how to actually fix that thing and it was blocking a build pipeline, or it was just clogging up your Jira tickets of, a whole bunch of bugs that you didn't know how to fix. The amount of times that I've gone inside an organization and I ask, oh, cool, so talk to me about your pipeline. What do you have? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, well, we use this dependency checker, this PHP dependency checker for a while, but, the person who knew how to write the outputs left, so we kind of just turned it off. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, if you're not thinking a lot about how this tool is actually going to add value or have an impact on your organization, throwing it in there and just expecting the outputs to solve all your problems and tell you exactly how to fix things is just definitely, it's just not going to happen. And then, lastly, the last thing is, tool bias comes in the fact of not planning for how you're going to maintain those tools. Often you're very rarely going to have a tool that you're going to put in and it's just going to work forever. And you never have to maintain it or look after configurations. As someone who worked in an organization and managed security components like web application firewalls, there was a really big bias of, oh, well, we've got a WAF, we've got a web application firewall, we're sorted. And it's like, no, it takes so much love and care and gardening to actually make that thing valuable. Otherwise, it's just some fancy proxy that you have sitting and is actually not providing any value. So it's definitely, if you're experiencing any of those biases, in terms of the impacts it can have, it's kind of like the concept of a gym membership, right? I have a gym membership. It doesn't matter if I use it or actually go to the gym. You ultimately just kind of feel better about having one and you feel healthier, despite it having no impact to you as a person. But then, it's the impact of this as well is that, you end up purchasing these tools. They sit on your, budget or on your cost code for so long, and it actually doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any value. And after a while, it just kind of gets hard to kind of pick it back up again because things are changing, things are moving. And, especially if those tools are going to be sending any of the outputs to other separate teams to go triage, like if you have a separate team of people who only do security fixes, it kind of breaks your whole model of having one team responsible for everything, from the development, the operation, and the security for that particular product or feature. Outsourcing those things to another team completely breaks it down, and it kind of takes that knowledge outside of that team.
Erica, do you have an advice for our listeners or viewers as to, okay, so we should use tools. I'm not against the usage of tools, but as you said before, sometimes we use too many of them, or we're not being super specific about what problem did we actually try to solve here. So how do you come and do the assessment as to what tools should we use to have a good, robust, secured pipeline?
Yeah. So I can give you some examples because, again, everything depends. But for example, one of the very first fundamentals of security is patching your stuff, patching your packages, your libraries, your actual infrastructure that your code is running on. So the very first thing I tend to ask is, how do you actually do patching? Is it built into your whole pipeline? Do you have something that's going to tell you whether or not certain libraries or packages are out of date? And if the answer is yes, cool. Well, you can kind of build on that, and you can kind of, check to make sure that the type of tool they're using is actually catching all their problems. But if the answer on that, if the answer in that decision tree is no, okay, well, it's not that you can just throw one in and then just expect everything to be fine, because what's probably going to happen is that you have a system now that is built off of out-of-date packages and libraries, and you can't just simply update them all and then just assume that your whole system is going to actually work. It's going to have to be a really slow approach. So it's kind of one of those things that I'll tend to ask questions in a yes or no way. So how do you take care of your patching? Do you do anything? And if so, how can we improve that? And how can we make minor tweaks? Or maybe, you should try this tool rather than this tool because it will cover more more components or more vulnerabilities. But if the answer is ever no, it's a slow journey. It's not necessarily something where you can just kind of throw something in and expect it to work. If the answer is no, it might actually fit outside of your pipeline rather than inside it. So, for example, vulnerability scanning. And doing regular scanning of components that might have new vulnerabilities that have just been released. You probably don't want to break your pipeline and require you to patch something that hasn't been properly tested, right? So you probably want to have that, and you don't need to patch it because maybe that feature or that service that's vulnerable you don't even use. So if you're going to then run your pipeline and have it fail because you need to patch, but you don't need to patch just yet, it kind of then causes you to, rather than focusing on actually the actual code itself, you're now trying to figure out, well, how does this code actually comply with these features? And you're now tackling more problems rather than the first one that you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of like, maybe taking vulnerability scanning outside of that pipeline and doing it in parallel. Mm-hmm. So, for example, maybe once a fortnight doing a Tenable or some other vulnerability scan across all of your public endpoints, and then reviewing that output to see, okay, well, which one of these vulnerabilities are things that we need to drop tools and fix, and which ones are things that we can just kind of add to the backlog to address in future iterations. So it probably comes down to asking that yes or no question. And if it's ever no, it kind of comes to some of the points that I'm just going to talk about in terms of how to actually start the slow baby steps of getting that thing embedded rather than just trying to throw something in and hoping that it will kind of work. So yeah. I think that answered it.
Do you feel like there's like a process-driven approach that sort of has to pre-exist? And I know that like no one really loves like compliance and policies and controls, but sometimes they do give you that relative picture of what is expected, right? And so I don't know, does that become part of like your assessment when you're looking at whether this tool is ready for adoption or is even the right thing to be looking at right now? Like, do these controls even exist? Like you had mentioned before, like, do you know that you even have to patch or that there is supply chain risks?
For sure. There's definitely, it's like that maturity curve, right? Like the first job is actually, rather than fixing the problem, is actually understanding the problem.
Yeah.
Because if you're just running tools and you actually don't understand your output, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah. And there's false positives and like drama that comes with running tools that like, if you're not ready for, it is not cool. Yeah.
100%. And especially too, like from someone who has, spent time managing, like, for example, a default configuration for like a security appliance, like a firewall or IDS or an IPS system. If you're turning on those default rules and just hoping that this tool is going to solve all your problems, like, you're going to be in for a massive nightmare of just like constant false positive tuning. And actually understanding
that very often the basic configuration or the factory configuration is very bad configured. Like, don't use it. It's like it has vulnerabilities inside.
It's such a broad group of like configurations, and it's not going to apply to anyone perfectly. It's very much like a thing that when you go to implement those things, it's like, cool. Well, first step is to kind of like turn them off and then slowly start turning on the ones that actually apply to how your application actually works. Why clog up your logs and everything with, PHP vulnerabilities when you don't even use PHP? Like it's, and you're going to find so many people just throwing a whole bunch of garbage across your websites constantly that the outputs of some of these tools and some of these logs is just going to be garbage if you're not taking care of them. So yeah, man, the hard life of an engineer and doing tuning. But just to talk really quickly about the overcoming some of these biases. It kind of comes down to, if you're asking those questions such as how do you patch your systems, how do you maintain your libraries or packages, how do you actually check for new vulnerabilities outside of patches that might be available? Because knowing that you could be vulnerable to something without actually having a patch is something that's important to kind of manage as well. If you're ever answering no, we don't do that, you need to kind of slowly start adding those tools. especially if the cadence of how your team operates is slowly starting to change. Like, if your team is only just kind of getting used to the concepts of embedding security in your whole way of working, throwing in a whole bunch of automated tooling and not actually getting to know the outputs or how it works or the configurations of it is just asking for a bad time. So slowly starting to add things, starting off with maybe a very beginner OWASP dependency checker for a small library that is quite critical, and then starting to learn the outputs, and then starting to then build in checks and whatnot into that pipeline is better than just kind of throwing everything in there and just kind of hoping that it will work.
Yeah.
But then also it's the second point of how it's actually going to be used, which is, I think, one of the most common things that I see at a lot of the organizations that I help is, we had this tool, but we turned it off because we didn't know how it worked. And, especially when an organization gives the freedom to your developers to pick the tools you need for the job. And I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. What I'm saying is that if you pick a tool, understand how it's actually going to fit into your pipeline. Understand, make sure the team are aware of the outputs. Make sure that they understand, again, to your point, Shira, the value that this tool actually provides.
Mm-hmm.
Is if this tool is now in this pipeline, but you don't actually know what value it adds from a security point of view, but it's just adding a lot of time, and we're now, not kind of achieving as many of our iteration goals as we want to, or if we're not getting through as many bugs as we had hoped to, it's just going to cause a lot of that unnecessary friction. And especially for those of us like here that are constantly trying to be security champions and encourage people to do security as part of being a developer or a software engineer, hitting this roadblock and adding things that don't actually add value that people can see is just going to cause people to kind of push back on those good security messages that we try and send.
Totally. And especially if you find a tool like, it's so complicated right now in the world of code you wrote, code you imported, and code you bought, right? And if you're going to have a container scanning strategy, that doesn't apply potentially to one of those areas, right? If you're going to have a source code scanning requirement, that maybe doesn't apply to code you bought, because maybe that's compiled and you actually can't scan it from a static analysis standpoint, or maybe you can. And so there's all these divergencies there. And if you preach one tool and it doesn't work for a core segment of your organization, you kind of look a little well, that doesn't apply here, but, and you're always kind of caveating it and saying, but, and it's really about that broader strategy of what tool applies to this app, and to this app, right? And so I don't know, it's tough. I try to break it down into code you wrote, code you imported, and code you bought as my 3 roads. But it's I totally agree with you. Tools bias is real.
Yeah. And that's actually a really good strategy of how to break it down is those 3 different aspects. So I think I'll borrow that one too. Sharing the knowledge. Yeah. That's great. And then, the last point, which I kind of already spoke about, but it's picking between whether or not you add that in flow or in parallel. So, should this tool and should these outputs actually be part of your actual CI/CD pipeline? And if so, you have to kind of balance out, okay, well, we might not be able to push out as many releases as we previously did, but hey, the value at the end of it is that we know for a fact that every single, for example, we know that every single release that we do is using patched and up-to-date libraries and packages. So at least the comfort of knowing that you're not pushing out bugs within some of the components that you already kind of use. But it's a bit of a balance, right? You're trading off a few additional releases for the fact that that those releases are patched and secure and strong. But then from the other side of you might not want to do your vulnerability scanning in flow. That frankly kind of sounds a bit terrifying to me because the outputs of some of those vulnerability scanners can be massive. But that should definitely be something that kind of sits outside of that pipeline rather than inside of it. Excellent. So the last one that I wanted to chat through is recency bias, which I think is a thing that, especially for those of us who watch a lot of podcasts, listen to a lot of conference talks, and you hear about all these cool people doing awesome things around the world, especially for the large companies who have these research teams that are dedicated to finding really cool stuff. But it's a concept of we can only go faster if we do this latest cool thing that we've read about or that we've learned about. And the sentence to check that if your organization suffers from recency bias, is to check that, you have a whole bunch of started initiatives or features or pieces of work, security initiatives that have been started but not finished. Or, it's a lot easier to kick things off than it is to actually finish them, right? So you've kicked off all of these really amazing initiatives, but after a while, it's just completely lost momentum. And, people are no longer kind of working on those projects or everything. You've got basically a plethora of half-started security projects all around your organization. And then the last one is, a constant shift in focus, or having people not really understand what your organization's approach is to security. And the impacts of this bias is, you end up spending a heck of a lot of time and effort and emotion and money trying to start all of these security initiatives. And unfortunately, for those of us in security, security can already feel like a sunk cost, right? A lot of people are already a bit resistant to want to do security fixes or to do security things. So by constantly switching things from one tool to another, because there's this really cool open source thing that someone launched at this conference talk and totally this will solve all of our problems. It's by constantly switching and not prioritizing and not making it clear what your goal is, it's just going to kind of shoot yourself in the foot, really.
Yeah, I feel like you lose credibility by doing that as well. And I'm sure Nikki loves that one because you talk about that a lot, Nikki. I find of not following the trends and kind of thinking on your own. And,
yeah, I don't know. I try, but yeah, recency bias leading into tool bias is
Yeah.
No, it's a great point. I never really thought of it like that. Like in terms of we're all sort of biased for what we just heard last week at the last con, at the last, hacker, news post. And we're gotta run on that. Right. And we all just pile in. And you're right. What are we trying to solve by piling in with this tool?
Yeah.
Do you think that security professionals suffer more from the recency bias because we're kind of curious people? We always like to explore new solutions. Do you think that the average software developer also suffers from this?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I definitely tend to work more with the security people, and 100% they do tend to suffer a lot from recency bias. I mean, I know I was on a client a few months ago, and it was at the end of one of those ComfyCon or virtual talks that happened, and someone had talked about this really cool project. And next thing you know, my team are distracted by spinning up virtual machines trying to test out this new thing. And there's no harm in testing out new tools and checking them out, but by testing them out and then actually trying to embed them, two different things. If you can play and have a fun time, but let's also focus on what our goals are for our team. But yeah, from a developer's point of view, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think some developers, the ones that tend to go to conferences and are learning at different ways or different ways to use different resources. For example, I remember when Lambda started becoming a thing. And then all of a sudden, all of my developer friends were building their side projects using Lambda and serverless. And that was the latest, hippest, coolest thing. So I think some of them still tend to, from my experience.
I agree. I think everyone's also existentially fearful of legacy, right? And so in order to combat that creep, when does this thing become legacy? Is it 3 years, 5 years, 7 years? We're sort of just this is who we are. We have to seek out the latest and greatest. But I think you're right. When you kick the tires, it's totally cool. But when you start rolling it into production, just because without clear requirements and reasoning, maybe that's when you get into that dicey road.
We have Adrian in the chat saying that in his experience, the front end people tends to be the one who are always trying to rewrite things in the latest, framework. So yeah, I guess it's not only security; it's a bit everywhere in technology.
Yeah, and Adrian is right. JavaScript is eating the world. I think, right? That's the one.
And in terms of overcoming this is exactly what you just mentioned. It's knowing what your organization's goals or aims are. There's no harm in trialing things out. For example, one of the organizations, one of the clients that I worked with, they had a down week at the end of each 12-week iteration, or every 12 weeks, where they just kind of did random stuff. And they might be like spun up this like, random new malware analysis inbox environment. And does our organization deal with malware? Not often. And if ever often, we'll just send it to virus total and then day's done. But hey, yeah, you want to have a bit of a play and pretend like, you're part of a intelligence community, cool bit of malware analysis. Sure. Like, you've got a week to kind of mess around and to learn about it. Because there are still some added benefits of playing around with some of those things. You kind of challenges the way that you think about certain things. But ultimately knowing what your organization is trying to aim for, and if that particular new thing or that new framework or that new tool doesn't have an impact to how you do your security or your operations, it's not going to actually help you achieve what you set out to actually do. If that particular it might be cool and hip and awesome, but in the context of your organization, it actually doesn't apply because kind of to the third point, your threat model might be completely different to someone like, if it's a new cool tool from the likes of the Netflix security team. Yeah, I love the stuff that they put out through like their monkey army. But in the context of a lot of organizations, the model that they're kind of striving for is completely different to like some of the small startups in New Zealand. These are like tiny companies that are just trying to survive and just trying to maintain like competitive advantage and make a profit. And the tools that they need are completely different. So
you kind of sound crazy trying to bring in chaos engineering and
exactly.
right.
You're like a one-page
all your servers to shut off at the same time.
Yeah, totally. I feel that sometimes that's exactly what I do. Like I go to just conferences. I think AppSec California is one of them where you learn from, the best, the FANG, and then you come back to work and it's just like that just doesn't apply. Right. And you kind of have, and all the biases and the recency biases, and you're wondering, and there's a thought process going through it as well is, do I need it? Do I understand it properly? And sometimes it just doesn't really work, even like it's a concept, they thought about it, but I haven't really tried it. And you have to go through all these things. So
and I mean, like, it could to that conference speaker, like they must have they really kind of pitched their talk in a good way. If you're like, I think I suffer from this problem too. They must have really put together a really good talk. So kudos to them for really kind of sharing the message and sharing the mission and stuff.
Yeah, some talks are really like use cases, and I like those, right? Like we had a problem, we found this tool, and we tried it and implemented it that way. That's fantastic.
Or
and created a new tool. Yes, that's great, right? And even if it doesn't apply to me, you can see an example and get inspired by that. But sometimes it's just like, it should work because I saw a problem, I heard about the technology, and then it's a concept yet that hasn't been tried, and then you're influencing a bunch of people to try these new tools or just new ideas that actually don't work, and that's a problem. I mean, hey.
So just knowing what you're actually doing, focusing and kind of coming back to, if you're kind of shifting your focus onto these random new tools or new frameworks, it kind of will, again, shoot yourself in the foot in the sense of, if you previously had planned to address these bugs or these features as part of, these iterations, and you're not focusing and using that time wisely, you're going to end up, not meeting particular targets, not being able to push certain things out. So just making sure that you stay focused and you save kind of the exploration of some of those new tools for innovation weeks or, whatever your organization might do, or even just in your, side project, spare time, 20% time kind of thing. That's recency bias, but I think really all of these biases kind of come down to three core things that you have to kind of do, which is one, just recognizing that bias, right? It's not recognizing that your organization does something shouldn't be the justification for doing it. It should be like hey, actually, we just embedded this random tool set that a salesperson came and pitched to us. Maybe we need to actually step back and actually understand what value that thing has and why we're actually doing it, rather than, whatever's on the brochure or whatever kind of, marketing spiel that we might have been pitched to. But it's like the first step is actually recognizing it, right? And recognizing your symptoms. But really all of the challenging and pushing back on it kind of focuses around 3 core concepts of, just being disciplined and focused and consistent with your approach. It's not going to be perfect. It took me a really long time personally to stop using the terms from a seniority basis point of view of, obviously it's this, or it's so easy, or, those type of terminologies. And it took me a lot of time personally to overcome this. But half the battle is just recognizing that I do it and recognizing the impact it has to my team of making them feel stupid or not as smart, or, especially for the team members who look up to you. So being consistent and focused and disciplined in how you kind of address those biases is basically the TLDR of this chat. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it though when it comes to the 3 different biases. Are there any other questions or?
Yeah, there's a good question in the chat. There's a few. So first question is, I think it's a comment. One of the biggest problems I've seen is orgs trying to take another's approach to try to retrofit it. I think we covered that, and I agree, Buffy. Second point is, it's more of a question. Would you say setting up some KPIs would help you in ensuring that you're using your time wisely on your tooling?
That's actually a really good idea. Definitely. And I think when it comes to setting up those KPIs, I think keeping that bar low and as something that's achievable is a good idea. So it's, the whole concept of Agile is continuously showing value. And for example, a really good way to show value with, for example, maybe using vulnerability scanners as an example. So, let's say your organization has a few different public-facing websites or public internet-facing services, and, you want to start scanning them to make sure that they're staying patched or they're not vulnerable to things. Starting your KPIs really, really small and really, really narrow of, hey, we're going to once a month run the vulnerability scanner and then make sure that we address any of the critical things that come up on that. And by address, I don't mean necessarily patching them, but maybe you set the KPI of once a month, we will at least understand what those critical things are and determine if it does apply to us or not. And then just slowly starting to increase those KPIs based off of how comfortable your team becomes with using the tool, or how much value it actually had as part of doing that first round. So, maybe you find that, for the past 3 months, all 3 of these vulnerability output reports that you have, all of the critical vulnerabilities are things that don't apply to you because the scope of your product is much smaller, that you don't actually use those services. Because, vulnerability scanners aren't perfect. A lot of the time, they're just probing various different sorts and services and just seeing if stuff runs, or just kind of inferring based off of the software you use that, oh, hey, if you use the software, there is a service and therefore you could be vulnerable. But, if you kind of notice that by the first 3 months that you're able to smash through reviewing all of those critical things, and you're able to address them, well, maybe then you move to doing it maybe once a fortnight, or maybe kind of expanding the scope of making sure that you address all of your critical and highs, and just kind of like slowly starting to increase those KPIs. But definitely, I think setting those KPIs to show when value is being made, such as, making sure that we're not vulnerable to critical vulnerabilities, or making sure that all of our releases include up-to-date packages and dependencies. I think that's a really good way to kind of show and demonstrate the value that those security tools are providing. Yeah.
Cool.
We had a comment of thanks. He loved the idea of setting a low bar and raise it according to the feedback received.
Yeah, totally.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and it comes down to like the seniority bias of it all as well. Like if you were to have me come into an organization and run Tenable.io, like, yeah, I'll be able to smash it, go through all of the outputs and everything's, roses. But, it's kind of one of those things, if you set the bar low, it gives you that room to breathe, and it gives you time to, hey, I might turn to one of my other engineers and say, hey, can you take a look at this output and let me know what you think? And then, yeah, I might have already known because I can skim through something and understand it quite quickly because I'm experienced with that tool. But I want to see from their perspective of how they go about it. They might think that, it might take them a little bit longer, but if we both get to the same conclusion, I can then reinforce that with saying like, yeah, spot on. Like, that's exactly what I would have said. So now you don't need me to do this. You can do this. And now it's, them who then I just get to kind of check to make sure they haven't missed any gaps rather than doing it myself. So.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you so much, Erica. That was great. Were great talking points, great discussions. Before we let you go, I think you have a few things going on in the next few weeks. If not, I saw something passing by. Let me share it with you right here. Threat assessment for software architects you have going on. Yeah, what's that all about?
Yeah, so this is. You're very good at the social stalking of what I'm doing.
I try.
I mean that in the kindest way possible. So as part of QCon, doing a virtual workshop, which is talking all about how to do threat assessments or threat modeling for systems that you might be building. So highly recommend if you're trying to understand how to think about security for any of the systems or the products or things that you build. This will be kind of teaching the concepts of how to do a bit of a threat modeling exercise, understanding where your data is, where it flows, where it gets stored, and then thinking about the risks of, well, how could that data be lost, or how could it be changed or stolen and stuff like that. So if that's kind of up your alley, highly recommend. I'm going to be doing that not next weekend, the weekend after, 2 weeks.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, and also, I know that you're very involved in your community. You organize a whole bunch of events. KiwiCon, KawaiCon? How do you pronounce that? KawaiCon, yes, beside Wellington. Yeah. Is that still going on? What are you doing during COVID? Are you going virtual?
So, no, we're not. And it was a hard decision, actually. Me and Shira were talking about this earlier, and that, back in May, we kind of made the call. We're like, virtual conferences just aren't our bag. And we don't want to do something that we're not like entirely motivated by. And there's so many people virtually around the world that are kind of stepping up and running those things. So instead, we're just kind of enjoying some of those talks. But we are doing a cookbook.
Yeah, that's what you were saying. Talk about that.
Yeah.
Is it with security recipes or something we can eat?
Both. It could be both. We were somewhat inspired. So I'm on a crew that runs KiwiCon, but also KawaiCon. And what we noticed is that in our Signal group, throughout the whole lockdown period in New Zealand, our chats were just full of pictures of food and amazing crafting that we were doing. So we decided, we're like, well, what if we took everything that was in our Signal chat and made a book out of it? And some of our crew members are fantastic cooks, amazing cooks. But we decided to kind of put together a bit of a, it's going to be a food recipe, a crafts, instructions. But also we have some people that are doing short stories, some random hacks that they're doing. So it's kind of like a non-serious, if you want to submit something, submit it. But it kind of goes to, I'm not sure if any of you have kind of seen KiwiCon in the past. We're a bit of a different conference. We're a bit weird.
I haven't been or seen, but if you can still see the website from 2019 is really cool. You can kind of there's command to see the menu and there's speakers. I had a lot of fun going through that. You can definitely see that you pay attention to details. That's super fun.
Yeah. So we're definitely on the stranger spectrum of conferences. But yeah. So if anyone listening wants to submit something, we're taking stuff from everyone around the world, and then we're gonna put together a bit of a.
We'll open up a call for recipe. And
awesome.
CFR. Well, before we go as well, Shira, you mentioned it in the beginning, but there's also AppSec Tel Aviv starting next week.
That's right, on Tuesday. So it depends where you are in the world, if it's tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. It's the first day of the conference. It's a training day. We have 4 workshops, 2 morning workshops, 2 afternoon workshops. You can check them out on our website. They're free of charge, of course. So anyone who wants can participate. Threat modeling, iOS hacking, web hacking, really great content. On Wednesday, from morning time, Israel, until the evening, We have the second day with 2 tracks of amazing talks all day long. You can just take the link to the Zoom and join whichever session you feel like. Lots of great talks. We had a great call for paper committee that picked up great talks. So please feel free to join us from anywhere in the world.
Fantastic. Any last word, Nikki, going on for you? We normally don't have anything to promote. we're doing DevSlop.
Yeah, not a big promoter, but yeah,
It's okay.
Maybe soon.
Yeah,
I
actually
got some recipes for you though. So
Sweet. Yes.
I could promote that. Yeah.
Awesome.
I've been making a lot of hot sauce during COVID. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Perfect.
good stuff. Well, thank you, Erica. Thank you, Shira. Thank you, Nicole. That was great. And we'll see you in about 2 weeks. I think we have Chloe talking to us about burnout in AppSec. So that's a bit of a change for DevSlop, but I think a talk that's necessary. So awesome. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. And thank you. Don't hang up right away, Erica. We like to chat before we go.
Okay.
Okay, awesome.